Hello children, it's lovely to see you again, and I think that some of you are coming back to school soon, so it'd be lovely to see some of you again. Now the first thing we're going to do is light our candles, our 3 candles, in the name of God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. And there's our 3 candles. And you can see the cross behind me. Now last week we talked about the exciting story of Pentecost, when the disciples were given the gift of the Holy Spirit. And it was just as Jesus had said. When Jesus had said, "You won't be alive anymore, but I won't actually physically be with you because I've now gone to be with my Father in heaven," they didn't understand. But when this happened, when the day of Pentecost came, then the wind came and the flames and the gift of language, so that all the visitors in Jerusalem understood exactly what Peter and the other disciples were saying. They had a feeling inside of them, and they weren't afraid anymore, because the Spirit of Jesus was living in them, and it made them feel very brave, very confident. They could do anything. And I just want to tell you a little bit about somebody called, well, he was known by 2 names, Saul and Paul. And a little while later, Saul was converted. We had that story of Saul on the road to Damascus, because at first he didn't like the Christians at all. And it took his experience on the road to Damascus to change his mind. Well, Saul joined together with another disciple called Silas, and they decided to go to Philippi. Now they established a church in Philippi, and there's a letter in the Bible, in the New Testament, a letter to the Philippians. So you might want to have a look at that sometime. But although it went well in Philippi, there were always enemies, people who didn't want the people to turn to being Christians. And they didn't like Paul, just as they hadn't liked Jesus. And one day, I'm afraid Paul and Silas were arrested by the authorities, and they were put in prison and locked up. Well, do you think they were sad? No, because they had got the gift of the Holy Spirit. And that gift of the Holy Spirit made them feel confident and strong, and they knew that whatever happened, Jesus was there inside of them. And they'd got to spend the night in prison. They weren't sure what was going to happen to them the next day. But they decided to say their prayers, and then they sang some songs. And the jailer, the person who was looking after keeping them safe in that prison so they couldn't escape, he thought, well, I've never known people so happy to be in prison, particularly when they don't know what's going to happen to them tomorrow. And he decided to have a little sleep, because they were chained up, and the chains were on their wrists and on their feet, and they were locked, so they couldn't get up, they couldn't move. They were chained to the wall, and the prison door was locked with a big key as well, just like that church key. I don't know if any of you've seen it. Big key. Well, he drifted off to sleep. He was a bit fed up because he was kept awake a little bit by them singing, but eventually he drifted off. Well, during the night, something very strange and scary happened. All of a sudden, there was an earthquake. Now, we don't very often have earthquakes in this country. We do sometimes little earthquakes, but you can have very big earthquakes. And when an earthquake happens, the earth beneath you shakes very violently. And this is just what happened. The whole prison started to shake. And Paul said to Silas, "Oh, what's happening?" And Silas said, "I think it's an earthquake." Well, eventually it stopped. Oh, my goodness. Well, when they looked, the earthquake had broken the locks on their chains, on their wrists and their feet, and they'd come away from the wall. And even more, it had broken the lock on the prison door, and the door was open. They could escape, but they didn't. Saul said, "No, we won't go because we've got some work to do here." And you'll find out now what that work was. You see, Paul knew that the guard, who was a good man, he would be in terrible trouble if he lost them, if they just escaped, because he should have stopped them. Well, when he woke up with the terrible noise, the jailer ran to the prison, expecting Paul and Silas to long be gone, and he thought, "I'm going to be in terrible, terrible trouble." And Paul said, "Don't worry," because he could hear the jailer running down the corridor. "Don't worry, we're still here." Well, when the jailer saw them, he said, "Why haven't you gone? Why haven't you escaped?" And Paul said, "Well, I've got something to talk to you about." Well, the jailer said, "Come to my house and I'll bring you back tomorrow morning." And Paul and Silas said, "That's fine. We'll come to your house and you can have us locked back up in our cells tomorrow morning. God will take care of us." So Paul and Silas went along to the jailer's house and met the family. And the jailer told his family what had happened. And Paul and Silas spent the evening talking to the jailer and his family all about Jesus and all about the way Jesus wanted people to live their lives to make it a better world. Well, do you know, the jailer and his family were really, really keen to hear all that Paul and Silas had got to say. The next morning they were safely back in their prison cell. The door was locked and the chains were put back on. But do you know, strangely the authorities said, "Oh, let them go. Tell them to go away and not trouble us any more." Well, that was one adventure. Well, there was another adventure. There were lots of adventures. But the next one I want to tell you about is once again Paul was arrested. And he was going to be taken to Rome because he was a Roman citizen. He'd been born in Rome, to the court there to see what they thought about what he was doing. All Paul had been doing was really talking about Jesus, and lots of people were so happy to hear about Jesus and became Christians. That's the way the church began to grow in all kinds of different places in the world. But there were always those who didn't want people to be converted and to become Christians. So they arrested once again Paul, and they were taking him to Rome in a boat. Now, Rome was quite a long way, and it wasn't an easy journey because boats and ships weren't like they are today. And they had to stop a number of times at different ports because the weather was just too bad to go on. Now, Paul said because in the boat were prisoners, just like him, and soldiers who were looking after them, taking them so they couldn't escape. Not that they could really escape. They couldn't jump off a boat, could they, into that sea because it was much too rough. Now, when they got to Crete and they stopped there, Saul said, I think you should stop here. I don't think you should go on any further because the weather is going to be very, very bad. Well, they wouldn't listen. And they set sail again. They tried to keep as near to the land as possible. But the wind just wouldn't let them. And they were blown right out into the very, very deep waves. And for 14 days and nights, they were tossed about on the sea. How scary must that have been? Really frightened. But during the night, Paul, also known as Saul, had a dream. Well, it wasn't really a proper dream. It was a bit of a vision. He saw an angel. And the angel said, if you all stay in the boat, don't try to get off, stay in the boat and you will all be saved. The boat will be wrecked, but you will be saved. And so the next day he told them all, you must stay on the boat. Some of them wanted to try and get off into one of the lifeboats. No, you mustn't do that. An angel has told me that we must all stay in the boat and then we'll be safe. Well, gradually the wind took them nearer to the shore and they arrived at the shore. Now, I'm afraid that they hit the rocks and the boat was seriously damaged. But they were near enough to land. They could see it, that they could get to shore. And as they got to shore, they saw the boat broken to bits. Well, they didn't know where they'd landed. But you might recognise the name of this place. Some of you might have been on holiday there because they'd landed in Malta. Now, the people there were very, very friendly and they helped them and took care of them. And once again, Paul was saved. Now, he was saved in another way as well because I'm afraid the soldiers said, let's kill all the prisoners so they can't escape. And one of the centurions who'd listened to Paul said, no, that's not the right thing to do. So once again, Paul was saved to carry on with his work. And wherever he went and whoever he talked to, there were always some people who became Christians and a church was started. Remember, a church isn't just a building. It's a group of people who believe in Jesus Christ, who believe in God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and live good Christian lives just the way Jesus taught them to. So those are two lovely stories, aren't they? And if any of you want to read them, then you can look in the book of Acts, in the New Testament, go through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and then you'll find the book of Acts. And you can find a lot of stories in the book of Acts about how the church was formed. Now let's finish with our school prayer. This is our school. Let peace dwell here. Let the rooms be full of contentment. Let love abide here. Love of one another, love of mankind, love of life itself, and love of God. Let us remember that as many hands build a house, so many hearts make a school. Amen. And the blessing of God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit be with each one of you today and forevermore. Amen. I hope to see some of you soon and the rest of you a little bit later on. Goodbye. God bless. Love you.